Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to explore some really incredible material and unearth fascinating insights.
Absolutely.
Today we're diving deep into Carl Gustav Jung's Psychology and Religion. This is volume XI1 of his collected works.
A foundational text, really.
It is. And our mission, well, it's to unpack Jung's quite unique empirical take on religious phenomena. We want to explore this surprising idea of the unconscious having autonomy. And look at how these ancient symbols, still resonate so powerfully today, might make you rethink what you consider real.
It's definitely a compelling journey into the psyche, and I think right from the start, what's so crucial is Jung's empirical stance. He's very clear about it. He says, look, I'm here to observe phenomena. I'm completely abstaining from any metaphysical or philosophical judgment.
Okay.
For him, if an idea exists, if it actually occurs in the psyche, then, well, psychologically speaking, its existence is true.
That's a huge distinction right there.
Yeah.
So he wasn't asking if, say, a virgin conception was literally true, factually true, but rather, what's the psychological significance of the fact that the idea of it exists in people's minds?
Yeah.
How did he apply that kind of radical empirical view to spiritual concepts?
Precisely that way. He wasn't chasing literal historical proof. For Jung, the idea itself, its power, its prevalence in the human psyche, that was the undeniable fact.
Okay.
And this is what led him to that famous statement, the one that's often misinterpreted, about God. I do not believe, I know.
Right, caused a lot of stir.
It did. But that conviction, he felt it came from direct engagement. He mentions the entomologist Jean-Henri Fabre, who said something similar, I do not believe in God, I see him. Fabre and his certainty from insects, Jung from the psyche, from these dynamic manifestations of the unconscious. He called it the numinous, this powerful, independent factor. It's just an undeniable condition of being human, totally independent of our conscious will.
So if this numinous thing is an independent force, almost like a natural force, how does he then connect it to something that seems quite deliberate, like human ritual? Things like invocations, sacrifices, meditation. How do they fit in?
Well, it's fascinating because, yeah, many ritual practices are done specifically to evoke that numinous effect, right? Yet Jung notes there's often this underlying belief in an external, objective, divine cause before the practice even starts. Like, think about the Catholic Church administering sacraments.
Okay.
Believers expect spiritual benefits. Jung doesn't see this as, like, forcing divine grace. He sees it as recognizing its inevitable presence because the sacrament itself is seen as a divine institution.
I see.
So ultimately, he views religion itself as a kind of fundamental attitude of the human mind. It's this careful consideration and observation of these dynamic potencies, whether you call them spirits, demons, gods, ideals, whatever. Experience has shown them to be powerful, maybe dangerous, maybe useful, enough to warrant respect or even worship.
So it's less about a specific dogma, a specific set of beliefs, and more about a fundamental human orientation towards these powerful, sometimes overwhelming forces.
Pretty much.
That really challenges the common idea that psychology is, just about what you consciously know about yourself, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
Jung's insisting it's way more than that. It deals with empirical facts, real things, even if they're hard to access. And he really pushes back hard against that materialist prejudice, the idea that the psyche is just sort of a byproduct of brain chemistry.
Oh, strongly. And he gives some compelling evidence, or what he sees as evidence, against that view. He talks about cases he observed, hysterical fever, chronic psoriasis, even a severely dilated intestine cured almost instantly through purely psychological means.
Wow. Not minor things.
Not at all. And his conclusion is that a fact that's imaginary is by no means unreal. I mean, his example is snark. If someone imagines you're their worst enemy and kills you, well, you're dead because of a mere fantasy. Psychological disorders, he argues, can be far more dangerous than epidemics or earthquakes. And he points, chillingly, to the political ideals of 1914 or revolutionary Russia.
That is a chilling observation, especially thinking about when he was writing. It really underlines how terrifyingly real these psychological forces can be. And he makes the point that a patient who's suffering from some morbid fantasy, they don't feel like they created it, do they?
No.
Or any more than someone with cancer feels like they created their tumor. That suggests something profoundly autonomous at play.
Exactly. He posits that the morbid fantasy is like a spontaneous growth and excrescence from a part of the psyche that consciousness doesn't identify with. It's an autonomous formation that just kind of infiltrates your awareness.
Right.
His famous association experiments, they revealed these autonomous contents, or complexes, he called them. They behave almost like independent little personalities, partial personalities. And this, he thinks, is why people often fear becoming too self-aware. There's this sense that there might be something hidden, something powerful backstage that could just overwhelm them.
So that fear, that daisy-daimonia, he calls it, this sort of superstitious awe or dread towards the unconscious and its unpredictability, that makes perfect sense then.
It does.
We're often just cruising along in a state of happy unconsciousness, until these forces make themselves known. But he also talks about when people gather in large groups.
Yeah.
It doesn't just make a bigger group of individuals, it transforms them into something else, like a disordered mob. It unleashes the deep dynamics of the collective human being, the beasts and demons that he says slumber within each person. He completely rejected the idea that the psyche is purely personal, especially when faced with a collective things like the bloody explosion of Bolshevist ideas.
Yeah, it's a powerful warning about the dangers of just dismissing these impersonal, unconscious forces. And Jung saw this danger not just out there in society, but also right in the therapy room with an individual patient.
Yes.
He suggests that trying to reduce these really overwhelming phenomena to just personal stuff, like, oh, it's just a father complex, would be a serious strategic mistake when dealing with a patient.
Right.
Instead, it's much more effective to understand that a complex is an autonomous power working against the conscious personality. The patient isn't just choosing to feel or act this way.
Okay, so if the unconscious holds this autonomous, almost kind of terrifying power, how does Jung suggest we actually engage with it
Yeah.
directly?
Well, a key way is through dreams.
Yeah.
He calls them the voice of the unknown. And he notes that, primitive societies, even ancient prophets like Hosea, they recognize dreams as both divine messages and sources of trouble, of tribulation.
Interesting.
This led to some fascinating taboos. He mentions the Elgon tribe in Africa, where apparently only the chief and the medicine man dared to dream.
Really? Why?
Because dreams were considered the voice of their Mungu, their numinous power, their god, essentially. So it was too powerful, too dangerous for ordinary people.
Wow. That historical perspective is really important. And then medieval thinkers, he brings them in too, right? Like Perarius?
Yes, classifying dreams by origin, natural causes, human thoughts, or divine influence. They even had ways they thought they could discern demonic dreams.
Oh.
Apparently, those dreams predict useless future events just for show, for vain ostentation. Divine dreams, though, they supposedly came with this inner illumination, a deep conviction, revealing the supreme mysteries of our faith.
And Jung's take on all this, what does he say about interpreting dreams?
He's quite direct. He says a dream is its own interpretation. We should take it as it is. It's a natural phenomenon, not some deliberate trick or stratagem. It just emerges, especially when consciousness and willpower are low, like when we sleep.
Yeah.
And this brings us to a really fascinating series of dreams from one of his patients. An intellectual man, actually. Had a Catholic upbringing, but consciously no real interest in religious problems. His unconscious, however, well, it had other plans.
Okay, right. Let's unpack this. This patient's dreams sound like they become a real window into these autonomous religious tendencies of the unconscious. What was the first one? This universal Catholic Church dream.
Yes, the first one is quite dramatic. It's set in a theater, presenting this idea of a universal Catholic Church founded by Jesus and Paul.
Okay.
But the inside looks strangely like a mosque, maybe Hagia Sophia. No images, but lots of framed proverbs like, do not flatter your benefactors. Kind of odd.
And there's these remarkable rules, almost counterintuitive. Soldiers, when you feel yourselves in the Lord's power, avoid speaking to him directly. Precious and important things are inexpressible. Then there's this very anti-ascetic vibe, right? Wine, cheerful people, even jazz music. And the dream ends with the patient feeling this sense of great relief.
Yes, but then there's the crucial turn.
The mysterious woman.
The unknown woman, exactly. At first she seems to agree with this setup, but then she just bursts into tears, cries out, then nothing remains, and vanishes.
Okay, what does that tell us? Who is she?
Jung identifies her as the anima, the feminine aspect of the patient's psyche, basically representing his unconscious, his feeling side. Her negative reaction is key.
How so?
This easy, worldly, compromised religion, which the patient, being a rational intellectual, initially found quite appealing, is deeply unsatisfactory to his deeper psychological needs. Her tears signal that this superficial adaptation leaves his soul, his deeper emotional life, completely unaddressed. It's empty for her.
Ah, I see. So this first dream, even though it felt good to him at the end, It actually presents a pretty unfavorable view of religion when it gets corrupted by worldliness,
Ah.
like a sentimental religiousness replacing the living mystery.
Exactly. It's not offering genuine help or having a real moral effect.
And what's really intriguing is how this dream fits into a sequence, doesn't it? You mentioned it was framed by two other terrible dreams.
Yes, precisely. There were preceding dreams involving the reconstitution of the Jurkin and the magical transformation of animals into human beings. Very strange, unsettling images. Those dreams showed these unfavorable, kind of raw manifestations of the unconscious. So the church dream, seen in that context, becomes an attempt by his psyche to find some protection, maybe a solution, in established religion.
Right. And the dream after the church dream, the one about transforming animals into humans.
That continues the theme of creation, renewal.
Yeah.
It suggests a really profound internal process of transformation is trying to happen.
Okay, then we get to the house of concentration dream. This sounds significant.
It really is. In this one, the patient enters a house specifically for inner concentration. An old man tells him visitors will be purified. Then this powerful voice speaks.
What does it say?
It says, "What you are doing is dangerous. Religion is not the tax you pay to do without the image of the woman, for this image is indispensable."
The image of the woman again, the anima.
Yes. The voice continues, "Woe to those who use religion as a substitute for another aspect of the soul's life. They are mistaken and will be cursed." And it concludes quite powerfully. "From the fullness of life, you must engender your religion. Only then will you be blessed."
Wow, okay, this seems like the core message for him, really crystallizing.
Absolutely.
The image of the woman, his anima, his neglected feeling side. The dream is telling him his intellectual rationalism just isn't enough.
Right.
Genuine religion, genuine wholeness has to come from his entire life, from lived experience,
Yeah.
including the difficult emotional stuff like love, commitment, fidelity, not as a way to avoid those things.
Exactly. It can't be an escape route. It has to emerge from the messy fullness of life.
That's a really powerful directive. And this series of dreams, especially the House of Concentration one, it subtly points towards another huge archetypal theme for Jung, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Fraternity, the number 4.
Yes, very much so. The dream mentions 4 burning points, forming pyramids, suggesting an inextinguishable fire, which is historically an attribute of divinity.
So how does this number 4, the fraternity, tie into older traditions?
Yeah.
What's its significance for Jung?
Well, the number 4 has just consistently symbolized a fundamental ordering principle across so many cultures for millennia. You see it in Plato's Timaeus, Pythagoras, various Gnostic systems, Christian iconography with the 4 evangelists, the tetramorph.
Right.
And in this patient's dreams, he recorded about 400 of them. This quaternary symbol appeared over 70 times, often as circles divided into 4 or squares or other 4-part structures. And crucially, this was all happening without any conscious influence or knowledge on his part.
And Jung noted that people spontaneously interpret these symbols when they emerge as representing themselves or maybe a creative, life-giving sun deep within their unconscious.
Yes, a symbol of wholeness.
Which leads us to a really critical point. While Christianity's central symbol is the Trinity 3 in 1, the unconscious seems to spontaneously produce the quaternity, the 4. So it feels like the unconscious is pushing beyond a perfect 3-part ideal towards a 4-part whole. What is the profound implication of that missing 4th element?
Jung argues it's often the principle that gets consciously rejected or seen as inferior in particularly Western thought. It could be evil, the feminine principle, matter itself, the shadow.
Okay.
But the real insight here, Jung believes, is that psychological wholeness, what he calls the self, isn't about achieving some kind of abstract purity by cutting things off. It's about integration.
Integration.
Of everything. The quaternity tells us that the path to completeness involves embracing and reconciling with the very things we might deem unholy, imperfect, or incomplete, rather than just projecting them onto others or denying them in ourselves.
That's a truly radical rethinking of spirituality.
It is. It suggests that the orthodox Christian Trinitarian formula might be, from a psychological perspective, incomplete because it largely omits or externalizes the principle of evil it exists, but sort of precariously as the devil outside the Godhead.
So that missing 4th often represents what we push away. He mentions Gerard Astornius, a medieval physician.
Yes, who identified the devil with the quadricornutus binarius, a 4-horned duality. It connects evil with this idea of 4-ness. And it seems the alchemists were grappling with the same kind of symbolism too, weren't they?
Absolutely. Their whole quest for the philosopher's stone, often called the rotundum, the round substance Jung, saw that as a projection of these same inner psychological processes. The stone was often symbolized as a living, hermaphroditic being, the second Adam or the philosophical man, containing the four elements. They were trying to liberate a divine spirit, often called Mercurius, from within matter.
Yeah.
So not just out there.
No, hidden within the very depths of matter itself, or psychologically speaking, hidden within the depths of the human psyche.
Which ties straight into the concept of the mandala, right? Those concentric diagrams, often four-parted. Jung saw his patients spontaneously creating these.
Yes, he did. And he observed that these mandalas, created without the patient even knowing their history or meaning, seemed to serve as a kind of protective enclosure, a temenos, he called it, using the Greek term for a sacred precinct.
What's its function?
It seems to help prevent inner chaos, to promote a kind of concentration around a central point. And that central point, Jung calls it the self.
And the self isn't the ego.
No, not at all. The self, in Jung's model, is the center of the total psychic personality, which includes the conscious ego, but is vastly larger, illimitable, really. The mandalas are expressions of a religious attitude, in his view, a relationship developing with this supreme psychic factor within.
And when people have these experiences, create these mandalas, they often report feeling better.
Yes, often a sense of perfect harmony or integration. It signals a positive transformation, a deeper connection to this inner reality.
Okay, so tracing this historical evolution, you have gods projected externally, then maybe a single God-man like Christ, and now Jung seems to suggest that God-man image is dissolving into the common individual, leaving a kind of void. And he warns this can lead to a hybris of consciousness, right? Where individuals start thinking they sort of englobed their own soul, that they're fully in control. But he insists the unconscious has this dangerous creative autonomy that you just can't dismiss as merely an absence of consciousness. What does that hybris, that inflation look like in real life when people deny these deeper forces?
That's a crucial point. This historical process, the desanimation of the world, the withdrawal of projections, it means that everything we once saw as divine or demonic out there has to, in a sense, return to the soul, to the unknown interior of human beings.
Okay.
The error of old school materialism was denying God because, well, he wasn't found physically in space. But the potential error of a certain kind of psychologism is reducing God or these powerful forces to mere illusion, just a psychological quirk. So when Jung talks about inflation, he means a psychological state where the ego gets overwhelmed by and identifies with these powerful unconscious contents. It leads to a dangerous sense of grandiosity, maybe even psychosis in extreme cases. It's not just arrogance, it's a loss of boundaries, a blurring between the individual self and the vast collective unconscious.
So for Jung, an illusion, if you want to call it that actually heals someone, that profoundly transforms them. It's psychologically indistinguishable from a curative religious experience. It's just semantics, really.
Pretty much. The real question isn't about objective existence in the way we normally think of it. It's about the effect these inner forces have.
And when God dies, metaphorically, when that supreme value is lost for an individual or a culture, the person risks this inflation, this dangerous identification with the divine, and getting completely overwhelmed.
Exactly. The true task then, as Jung sees it, isn't to try and create new lords or powers out of our own egos. It's to choose which lord one will serve, which dominant psychic factor will guide you and protect you from being swept away by uncontrolled impulses.
And that choice, however imperfect, that kind of defines God for the individual.
In a psychological sense, yes. He points to the archetypal nature of Christ's life, for example, showing how the death of God isn't just a historical or theological idea, but a universally recurring process in the soul. The loss and potential rediscovery of the supreme value that gives life meaning.
So it really comes down to finding a way to mediate between these opposites, reconciling the human and the divine, the conscious and the unconscious. The mandala, the quadrature of the circle, becomes the symbol of that integration, holding both the Trinity and that crucial missing fourth element.
Precisely. And the spiritual adventure of our time, as Jung concludes, is really about surrendering our conscious minds, our egos, to this indeterminate, indeterminable inner reality, trusting that even this limitless depth is governed by knowable psychic laws.
Knowable psychic laws.
Yes, and knowable not just through dogma or external authority, but through gnosis, a direct, intuitive understanding that arises from the psyche itself. Jung suggests that it's only those who kind of foolishly rebel against these inner truths instead of engaging lovingly and respectfully with the soul's depths who will ultimately find themselves lost.
So, thinking about all this,
Yeah.
What does it mean for you, listening right now? I suppose it means the mysteries we often seek. They might not just be in distant heavens or ancient texts. They could be woven into the very fabric of your own psyche.
Mm-hmm. That deep religious experience, that sense of meaning or transformation, it could be waiting not somewhere else, but right there in the vibrant, sometimes maybe terrifying, but always transforming landscape of your own unconscious.
The question is, are you ready to dive in?